Welcome to my first ever God, Law, and Liberty podcast, uploaded to my Substack page, which I hope you'll find. It's at Senator Fowler 94. And if you have been following that podcast, you'll want to subscribe here because I'm retiring at the end of the year. And this is where the real home of the podcast will be found. And subscribe to it if you would, and share it with others if you find this video helpful. Today, I want to examine the question of whether Christian legal and policy advocates are defending laws trying to protect minors from transgender medicine on the basis of a nihilistic cosmology. Now, for those who've been following me, they would know what that means. But for any who are new to this, a nihilistic cosmology is one that says, in the beginning, there's stuff. We don't really need to know how the stuff came to be. It just is. We just need to know how to use the stuff and what to do with the stuff. Stuff had no meaning. But when humans evolved and came onto the scene, humans created the concepts of meaning and value and the ethical relationships between things based on the meaning and values that they gave them. That's why it might be more important to save a baby seal than to save a baby from being aborted, right? Because we decide what the meaning of each of those things is and the values that should be associated with them and the ethics as to our relationship to them. So anyway, that's what nihilism is. Obviously, the Christian cosmology says no, in the beginning, God spoke his words, and with his words, he brought things into existence according to a nature that he had predetermined in his own mind, knowledge, wisdom, and counsel. And he gave everything their meaning and established the ethical relationships between them. So we really have a creation stories, one where by evolution we created meaning and value and ethics by our words, and one that says, no, God did it. So we're really in a fight today over the cosmology that informs our world, and specifically my interest, the cosmology that underforms our understanding of law and the legal arguments we make as Christians. So I want to look at the arguments made by the Tennessee Attorney General before the United States Supreme Court earlier in December in defense of Tennessee's law that says you can't apply medical treatments to minors suffering from gender dysphoria. And I want to examine them not to cast doubt or aspersions on the Tennessee Attorney General's office or for any of the legal and policy advocates that have pushed for these laws in multiple states, and they've passed, I think, in 20 states. But the purpose is to help us understand whether we are unwittingly giving in to an understanding of the cosmos, of the world, of existence that's contrary to what we actually profess, so that we could then adjust the way we do things. And there is a way to adjust it. And I'm not going to get into that today, but keep tracking with me, subscribe, you'll pick it up. But here's what the Attorney General says in defense of the law. And I'm using it simply because, one, it was given to the Supreme Court, and two, it's the same thing that's been given, generally speaking, throughout all the multiple states that have enacted these laws. All we have done is make clear that these treatments, which are irreversible often, have significant effects on minors and often leave them with bodies that are infertile and permanently damaged, that you have to wait until you're 18 to receive those types of treatments. Then later in the same page, this is 147 of the transcript, if you want to find it and read it, we think our law fundamentally draws a distinction based on medical purposes. Now, why would he say that? Because the Department of Justice is saying this law discriminates on the basis of sex and is trying to urge the court to say, you've always looked at sex classifications very carefully to make sure we're not stereotyping people, because women, for example, have been stereotyped that they should just be pretty objects, right? And they couldn't hold certain jobs or whatever else. So we have to, when there's a distinction based on sex, we have to give it more scrutiny than normal. And that's what the Supreme Court has said in the past. And none of that's in the Constitution, but in any event, that's where we've evolved to, I guess you could say. So here's the nature of the argument, just to explain for those that didn't listen to last week's podcast, or another one I'm getting ready to do. They say that if a person's birth sex is male, he can take testosterone treatments to, for instance, lower his voice or to help his body hair come in, those kinds of things that would be consistent where that identity, how we would see the person, is consistent with his birth sex. But a young girl whose birth sex is female, well, she can't get those testosterone treatments to lower her voice and to grow body hair so that she would appear um, as much like a boy as the male with the birth sex male. You see? So they're saying you're discriminating between persons who are entitled to the protection under the 14th Amendment. It refers to persons um, on the basis of sex. And the state of Tennessee has said, no, no, no. We're not discriminating on the basis of sex. We're discriminating on the purpose, on the basis of the purpose for which you want to use it. But what it never does is explain why we would not allow the use of the drugs inconsistent with birth sex. And in fact, if you'll notice from what I quoted, the state says you can do that as an adult. They've essentially conceded that birth sex and gender identity, how you think of yourself and how you want to present yourself to the public, well, they're different things, but you just can't do it as a minor, not because it is already unlawful and would be unjust. It would allow the harm to the body and limbs and health of a person, but no, because it has health risks that you need to be an adult to undertake. So you see what's happened here is that there is no given meaning or value to the way our bodies are made. Now, the Christian cosmology says, oh, yes, they are, because in the mind of God, He created things according to what was in His head so that what they possess is conforming to what they are according to God. So we are human beings, and within the category of human beings, we are male and female. And to reflect that, God created males one way and females another way. And you can't rewrite God's cosmology with your words. So when we concede that this can be done, we're conceding that the understanding of what it means to be a person in the 14th Amendment, which is a human being, right, can be rewritten, but only as an adult when you're better informed of the risks. Now, to further examine how we're capitulating to nihilism, there's an exchange between Justice Kavanaugh and the state attorney general that I think is relevant. Notice what the exchange. It's on page 148, 149. Justice Kavanaugh, just one clarification. It's an obvious point, but I want to make sure you agree with it, which is you're not arguing that the Constitution takes sides on this question. You, as I understand it, you're arguing that each state can make its own choice on this question. So, from your perspective, as I understand it, it's perfectly fine for a state to make a different choice, as many states have, than Tennessee did, and to allow those treatments, correct? Now, here's the Attorney General's answer. Yes, Your Honor, that's correct. And we think that's because of what Your Honor has pointed out, that no matter how you draw these lines, there are risks and potential benefits, and harms to people on both sides. And the question of how to balance those harms is not a question for the judiciary. In other words, the judiciary doesn't have to have a legal meaning or understanding of what it means to be human, to be a person, to be male and female. They continue. It's a question for the legislature. These types of policy choices are best left to the democratic process, and I think that's exactly what the correct way to think about this case. So you see, we no longer know what it means to be human. We're unwilling to say what it means to be human, and we're willing to say that that's up to how people want to define what it means to be a person, to be human. And that can vary from state to state. But a Christian cosmology would say, no, it can't. Because the understanding of what it means to be human and to be male and female, to be a person, is universal, it is uniform, and it's for all time, in all places. There can't be one understanding of what it means to be human and a male and a female in California or New Jersey or New York, and a different one in Tennessee or Arkansas. When we concede that point, we are denying a Christian cosmology and fundamentally denying the existence of the rule of law, that there is a law about what it means to be human, to be male and female, and it applies everywhere at all times and to everybody, not state to state, based upon the demos, the people, and how they choose to define that. That's nihilism. Okay. Now, here's the serious part about this that I want to bring up, and why I speak so often about it, even to the point of fatiguing and irritating some of my colleagues. But it comes from a book by Guillaume Groen van Prinsterer, Unbelief and Revolution. He's writing about what's taking place in Europe. This is in the 1840s, resulting from the French Revolution, which he describes as a revolution against belief in revelation, in God, and the repudiation of history. That history, of course, can't have any significance or teach us anything because there's no God behind it, no God of providence, right? That's directing things towards an eternally established end or purpose. Okay, so he's saying the world switched right there, and I would say it essentially switched to nihilism. We didn't get there until the last 30, 40, 50 years, but that's where it had to head. And here's what he says: it's not just a problem because there are some radicals who would believe, for instance, in transgender medicine. But he says we must consider the significance of the moderates. The latter may have shrunk from extremism. We're not going to allow this for children, but, if you're an adult, well, that's okay. Nevertheless, they honored the same principles. You see, that's what the state of Tennessee is doing. The same principles with respect to what it means to be human, what it means to be male and female. We're just saying you can't do it too soon because you may not fully appreciate the risk, not because there's anything true about the body and the way you were formed that conforms to what God's intention is. But he continues and says, and therefore they're accountable for the error, not just to the limits to which they were willing to follow it, but to the full extent of its development, for the whole series of errors and outrages which issued from the principle. We must keep this fact before us and heed the warning. Principiis obsta, fight the disease at the first symptom. Now, we may say, well, we can't do that. And there's a way to do it. And I've discussed that in my podcast. I've discussed it in my book, Transgenderism, Ancient Questions That Only the Ancient Days Can Answer. You can find it on Amazon if you want to. I'll be talking about it on my Substack. But he continues, and here's the real rub about this. Van Prinsterer says that these ultra-liberals, the true believers of nihilism, were rendered irrefutable by what the moderates teach. Now, how could he say that? Because you're reaffirming and reinforcing the very principle upon which they're making their legal argument, and you're just saying, yeah, that's right, but we don't want to be as extreme as you are. And so Christians, if we don't change the way we're doing things, then we are responsible. Even as David said when he knew that Doeg would kill all the priests, he said, oh man, I'm responsible because I knew what he would do when I took the showbread and the sword. Well, there are ways to fight this. And the way to fight it is with restoring to our understanding of the world and cosmology the doctrines of the Trinity and creation ex nihilo. That's the only foundation, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 3, upon which to build and upon which everything was built. And so we can't reform law according to a biblical cosmology until we restore a Christ-centered understanding of the cosmos to our understanding of law. Thanks for joining me for this first episode posted at Substack, Senator Fowler 94.